at opportunities. I think, when I'm coming out of college and I went to the University of Wisconsin-Madison, which is a pretty fun town. If any of you have been there, I don't know if you've traveled within the Big Ten, but I enjoyed it. Moving to Danville, Virginia is not first and foremost in a 21-year-old's mind. That's not exactly at the top of the list, but I did it. It was sort of a leap of faith in trying to get into the business. So, sometimes these opportunities don't look great when you're first looking at them, but they do lead to better things down the line. So I think that's probably one of my biggest pieces of advice on that.
So I'm curious when you knew that you wanted to go into sports journalism, because I hear sort of there's the spectrum of people that always knew that they wanted to go into it since they were a little kid, and people that just kind of fell into it once they entered into their professional life. So where do you fit sort of in that?
I'm kind of in both camps. I mean, when I was little, I was the kid that would go to baseball games and keep the official score in a notebook. So, before I ever knew I wanted to do this, it was probably kind of obvious that I wanted to do this. I mean, I was big into statistics and collected baseball cards and all that stuff. So I was into sports big time when I was younger. It didn't really dawn on me that it could be a career until I got to college. And I was just like looking for something to do that freshman year. And it's like, I didn't want to join a frat. And I don't know. I was just looking for an activity. In the second semester of my freshman year, I, kind of on a lark, I went out and I tried to write for the college newspaper. And, I was covering, women's soccer, and I didn't know what I was doing. They had me doing the next fall. I was doing the Big Ten notebook, where I would just sit on a teleconference and listen to what coaches say and then put into a notebook. And I had no idea what I was doing, but gradually, I enjoyed doing it. They put me on the men's basketball beat. And that first year I was covering the men's basketball team, they went to the Final Four. And I'm like, oh, this is kind of cool. And, you get to your upper years in college and you're like, shit, I have to find a job. I have to figure out what I want to do in life. And I'm like, this is kind of fun. I enjoy this. And the money was not great. And maybe I should have looked at that a little bit more before I got into it. But I enjoyed doing it. My dad always said, if you enjoy doing it, it doesn't feel like work. So I don't know if that's saying that I always knew I was going to be a sports writer, if I sort of fell into it just based on how circumstances went, but that's how it went to where I got into this profession.
What's the biggest difference from working at The Athletic versus a traditional newspaper?
I think The Athletic allows us to expand on some stuff that we want to do a little bit more than what a newspaper does. When you're a newspaper, it's always hitting deadline after deadline after deadline. And it's the daily grind and churn of being at a newspaper, where you hit it one day and then it's blank and you start over for the next day and you find another thing and it's got to be filed by 5 o'clock. And there are space constraints. You give us a story between 15 and 18 inches because that's the space we have for it. You can plan bigger pieces, but they always go on like Sundays when they have a bunch of space to run that type of thing. And at The Athletic, I think there's a little bit less focus on this day-to-day need to put something out there. And that was tough for me originally when I got there, because I've been a newspaper guy for almost 20 years of my life. So I was used to that day-to-day grind and trying to find something every day to write about. At The Athletic, they kind of want us to step back a little bit and go, okay, take in the scene, write a little bit bigger picture, take some time to do bigger type stories. I'm working on one right now. We're doing sort of a wayward program pieces for football. Nebraska is one of them. Virginia Tech is in that same category as well. Just hasn't quite been what it once was in the past. And this has been something I've been working on for probably a month. And of course I put it off to the last second. Now I'm hustling to write it by tomorrow so my editor can get a look at it, because that's how I do things. But, theoretically, you should have more time to do this kind of stuff at The Athletic, and they give you a little bit more time to breathe with your stories and do some things that, there's a little bit more opinion in it, a little bit more analysis in it, because they want us to be different from what a newspaper is, where they're just sort of reporting straight facts. So they like things. They're like, oh, here's 5 thoughts of what the game was. Here's some takeaways from the game, instead of just writing a straight news story like newspapers have been doing forever. So I think it frees you up a little bit to do different things when you're writing for the internet only, because newspapers are constrained by, black and white type and the space on the paper and all sorts of things like that.
So in terms of sports reporting, do you have someone who you look up to and influences you in your career?
Yeah, I'd say one of my biggest influences is here in Virginia, David Teal. He's in like 4 or 5 different Hall of Fames, and he's won Sports Writer of the Year here like 13 or 14 times. I mean, it's just ridiculous numbers that he has on these awards. But, more than just like racking up awards, I think I look at him and how he approaches the business and how he approaches interviews. And, he's prepared in everything that he does. That's one of the paramount things in this industry, is be prepared when you're going into an interview or going into a game. And he'll go meticulously through these game notes and pick out stuff that's important and that he wants to keep an eye on. And I've seen the way that he works sources and the way he does interviews, where everything he's getting at is not trying to get something to publish. He's just talking to talk to people and find out information, and that leads to better information down the line. So sometimes I think you see these reporters are like, I have to, hold this guy's feet to the fire, and I've got to ask him all the hard-nosed question right off the top. And you don't really see them build any kind of relationships with the people they cover. Well, David builds relationships with the people he covers. And, that's why he breaks a lot of stories, is because he's got scoops for days on this kind of thing. And that's why when you need a big picture piece on something, he's the one that you're like, I have to read this, because he's got great perspective, and he has all these people he's talked to that have given him the behind the scenes looks at stuff. So just sort of how he approaches the business, he's one that I've admired for quite a long time.
Hi, I was just curious how you try to continually incorporate your own voice into your writings and keep it interesting and new.
It's tough, especially when you cover a program like I have that's been pretty crappy over the last 10 years. I mean, they're just sort of like just muddling along. I mean, they can't seem to get out of their own way a lot of the times. I feel like I've been writing the same story over and over and over. Certainly in the previous regime, when Justin Fuente was the coach here, I'm like, man, I've written the story 100 times, and it's tough to find different ways to do it, but you can mix it up. I mean, you do mailbags, which allows, fans and readers to write in and ask you how to do stuff. And you can do a little bit of a different voice in that's a little more opinionated than writing straight news. You can do Q&As. You can try to find a different angle on something. Sometimes it's fun just to write something just completely off the beaten path. Like there was this guy, Anton Exum, who's like a rapper now in Richmond. And I wrote something about him last summer. He was a cornerback at Virginia Tech a while ago. And it's like, this story has nothing to do with football, except it's tangentially related from this guy used to play football, but it's just completely out of the football space. So that was sort of an enjoyable story to write because it was so different. So I think there are enough stories out there that you can mix it up, that you're not writing the same thing all the time. And that helps you find your voice. Over time, you'll find your voice and when to inject a little bit of opinion and when you can get, a little more crazy with your descriptions of stuff. And I think that just comes with time that you can figure that out. But sometimes it is tough to break the monotony because we kind of fall into these patterns, especially during the season where each week is sort of regimented throughout the week. So it's tough to break out like that, but I sort of lean on my editors to help me find different ways to write things.
You mentioned the mailbag with the fans. I actually was wondering, how do you usually incorporate those questions in the
Kind of cut out there. How do I incorporate those?
The mailbag questions that the fans send you.
Well, we usually have a form that we'll put up, and I'll tweet it out, and I'll say, just send me your questions. And I'll get maybe 40 or 50 in a good week, and I'll pick out like 6 from that group. Usually there are not more than 10 or 12 usable questions. Some of them are just like, I don't even know what I could say or how they would expect me to say it, but it does liven things up to do the mailbag, because you want to stay in touch with your readers. You want to know what your readers want to know about. I mean, I think I know a little bit about the program and what people are interested in, but sometimes it's good just to put it out there and go, hey, what do you guys want to hear about? I mean, you're the readers. You're the ones that are paying for this service to read The Athletic. So it's a good way to keep some connectivity there. But I think at the same time, you have to look at it and go, I'm going to pick some certain questions here that I can write specifically on, because some of them are just not very good questions, to be honest.
So moving back to The Athletic for a second, as it pertains to like the future of sports journalism and journalism in general, do you see more, websites like The Athletic existing as a model for the future, I guess?
Well, I hope so. Well, I hope nobody overtakes The Athletic, because I like being the the website that people go to for what we call local coverage on a national site. But I hope the model works, because the previous models were not working. You look at newspapers, and for the longest time they just had these great profit margins from the print side, and then the bottom fell out on that when advertising dropped. And then it turns out, hey, we were giving away our product for free online this entire time. And now they turn around and they start asking people to pay for it. And people are like, what the heck? This was free for 25 years. And now all of a sudden I have to pay for it. So I hope that The Athletic succeeds in that sense, that sort of changing people's thoughts on paying for stuff online, because, good reporting requires people pay for it. That's just, I mean, you wouldn't, go to a plumber and say, hey, fix my sink for free. Like, you're going to pay for that kind of thing. And yet in journalism, people are like, hey, give it for me for free, and just, rely on these weak advertising dollars to do it. So I like working at The Athletic. I like the vision that the place has. I think it's a much newer perspective than what newspapers were. And, sort of the management there that was stuck in its old ways, and this is how we have to do it. You see, that's failing across the country. There's like 2 or 3 newspapers that are doing well, and they're all national brands. But then you look at something like The Athletic and you go, you can still get local type coverage on a national platform like that. I know it sounds like I'm giving a pitch to go subscribe to The Athletic, which you should. But I do legitimately enjoy working there. And I really hope that this model succeeds, because honestly, I don't know what other model would work, because they've tried a bunch of other things and it hasn't worked. So if this doesn't work, I'm fresh out of ideas.
I was wondering, what are some mistakes that you made early in your writing career that you learned from, that helped you be a better writer now, and I guess that helped you improve overall as a writer?
I think one of the things, I look at, and I'm still working on this now, is that not every interview needs to be transactional, in the sense that every time I talk to somebody, it's not like I'm talking to somebody just to write about them, or I'm talking to this person just so I can get information that I'm putting in the story with direct quotes from this person. And I feel like that is, something that younger journalists, and, even today, I still do it. Sometimes I don't tend to my sources as well as I could and just check in. And, sourcing works better when you're talking to people all the time and you're just kind of kept keeping up with them. It's not great when the only time you talk to somebody is when you need something from them. But if you're talking to them all the time and you go, all right, now I have this story that I'm working on and I have this background with this person, they're willing to be a lot more open with you when you're talking to them. So source building and source, sort of cultivating those relationships. I think that's something that is very difficult earlier in your career to figure out and sort of master that part of it. I think another part of it is, for the longest time, I thought that the outlets I worked for would do right by me. And what I mean by that is, I went from Danville to Lynchburg, and I did not have a very high salary when I started at Danville, and it stayed low when I went to Lynchburg because I was essentially hired as a copy editor. They only gave you a certain bump every year. So for the longest time, I'm sitting there going, this newspaper will take care of me salary wise. They'll get me bumped up to these other people. And they never did. And they never were going to. I even went to them and had a conversation about that. They said, well, you're probably going to have to leave for another paper to get the kind of pay raise that you want. And so I did. I left like a couple months later to go to the Auburn job. And if I didn't do that, I don't think I'd be where I am in my career now. So I think don't get comfortable in one place. I think I was maybe a little too comfortable early in my career, one place, and thinking that would be how I get to the top or where I want to go in this profession. And I think you have to sort of take it into your own hands sometimes and force the issue and be willing to move around a lot. And that's a good way for upward mobility in this whole thing.
Question as kind of a beat writer, do you ever feel that you're competing with other beat writers covering the same team, or even with, other teams in the area, other sports?
Yeah, there's definitely competition. I'll say this, at Virginia Tech's at least friendly competition. It's not like I dislike the people that I'm working with, but I do like to get stories before they do. And I'm working to get stories before they do. It's tough here sometimes because they will do every kind of interview in a group setting. And it's tough to differentiate yourself from other people when that's the case. But yeah, there is a satisfaction of getting the story out there with breaking news before other people do. And there is a disappointment if somebody else beats you to that story. But I don't get too hung up on it. I'm not a guy that's just like, cutthroat, like this is a blood sport and I have to get the news out there. Like Adam Schefter and those guys, like I have no idea how they do that. Where they are just constantly breaking news and constantly on their phone trying to get scoops like that. And I'm sure they're extremely competitive, but there's a competitive nature in this whole thing among beat writers, even if we respect each other and work pretty well together at the same time.
So as we are getting closer to getting out of college, the process of job interviews, like what advice would you give in terms of like that process and like what like companies now are looking for?
Well, it's tough for me to say exactly how the process should work now because I think it's changed so much from when I was first starting out. And I haven't really had like a proper job interview since 2011 when I got the Roanoke job. The Athletic was more just talking over the phone with some people. It wasn't in person or anything like that. I think my biggest advice in the job interview process is just get to know people as well as you can. It'll help differentiate you if they can put a face or a story or know somebody who knows you when the application goes out, because otherwise they're just looking at, sort of the same application they've seen 20 times over. And, sometimes you think, oh, my work is really good and it'll set me apart from these other people. There's a lot of people out there doing great work too. And it's tough to be different in a stack of resumes unless the person that's doing the hiring is like, hey, I know that person, or I know somebody on our staff who can vouch for that person. So there is a lot of who in this business that helps. And part of that, I think, is just, getting your foot in the door any way you can. And, I interned at the Janesville Gazette in Wisconsin when I was in college there in one summer. And that helped me a little bit to getting some connections, to getting some clips out there. But I didn't really, network as well as I could have when I was younger. In the meantime, I had a guy who was a sports editor at the same paper who, went out to an Associated Press sports editors conference and was sort of chatting it up with all sorts of people out there and got to know the Kansas City Star editor very well. And that got him an internship there, which eventually got him a job there. So He was very good at that. He's very good at talking to people, just sort of, shooting the breeze with people. That's not my forte. That's not something I've ever done, but it certainly helped him in his career. So I would say try to get to know as many people you can, or just make yourself known to as many people you can. And part of that is just trying to do even little things to get that inside track. I don't know how many local newspapers are out there that have high school sports or, football or basketball playoffs or stuff like that. But newspapers are always looking for capable people to be stringers right out of college or in college. And if you can write clean copy in a timely manner on a Friday night or whatever these games are, these hiring people will notice that. And that's a good way to get noticed, and a good way to sort of get your name out there as somebody who's a trustworthy writer. So that would be my recommendation, is to seek out opportunities like that, because I think that leads to the other things that I was talking about.
What led you to kind of focus your career on college football?
It's weird because I was never a huge college football guy growing up. I grew up in Minnesota, and the Gophers suck. I mean, it was not like I ever paid attention to Gophers football. I think I went to one Ohio State game when Eddie George was there, and they beat him like 56-0 or something like that. Like, it was just an absolute butt whooping. But then I got to college, and, Wisconsin's pretty good, and Ron Dane was there at the time, and I took an interest in it. But I got to Danville, and I feel like I was more of a college basketball guy with the stuff I was covering. I didn't really get the college football like huge, and that became my sole focus until I got to Auburn. And that was just sort of by necessity. I mean, it's a way of life down there, much different than anything at the University of Virginia, what I was covering before that. So I think once I got on that, I just sort of started to like the sport a lot more, and embrace the crazy stupidity of it. I mean, it's not, you look at it compared to the NFL, it's not as good as the NFL. I think for a long time, what I wanted to do was cover the NFL. And after a while, covering college football so long, I just came to like it more. I like the game more. It's different styles. The NFL is one style, 32 different ways in my mind. And in college, you've got option teams, you've got spread teams, you've got, teams from all over the country. And I think that's just a lot more interesting to me than the other one. So it wasn't like I set out to my career to be a college football writer, but I just sort of migrated that direction from my experiences and all the different jobs that I've had.
Professor Sam talked a little bit about the story that you just wrote. Do you have kind of a favorite story that you've ever written, and how did you come up with the idea for it?
I think one of the best ones I've written, there's this guy, Wes Worsham, who was a big booster for Virginia Tech. Still is. He's still around. He's pretty old at this point. They named the field after him here. When I first got here, the previous writer had sent me this story idea about him where he was in the Korean War and met a guy who was from Blacksburg, Virginia, and they formed a friendship, and that ended up being his connection to Virginia Tech. And it was sort of this like incredible story where this guy's friend, he ended up thinking, got killed in action, and they got separated. And he came back to Virginia eventually, and sort of didn't want to go to Blacksburg because he felt guilty about his friend dying. And he eventually did 20 years later. And as it turns out, his friend did not die in the Korean War and had returned and actually died a few years later from a heart attack. And so he sort of felt guilty about this, and he always goes on their birthday. I think they share a birthday or it's close like that in August. He always goes to the gravesite and cracks open, I think it was a PBR to share a beer with him, because that was going to be their goal in the Korean War. Was if they got to the Yalu River on the northern border of Korea fighting, they were going to share a beer up there. So that's what he does every year on this guy's birthday. And that sort of led this Wes Worsham to Blacksburg and to discover Virginia Tech football, to become a big booster. And support Frank Beamer early in his time. So it was sort of this, sprawling tale of, halfway around the world and in the war and this confusing time where he thought his friend was dead. And a lot of it was just like pure luck that I stumbled upon this thing. But part of it was actually doing it because the guy before me had some of the story, but not all of it. And I don't know if he just ran out of time to do it, if he just never got around to it. But that was one of the first things I wrote when I got here. And it did pretty well. It won an award or second place in a feature writing award. And that was one that I think still kind of sticks with me just because of the interesting nature of how twisty and turns the story went with it.
Hello, how important do you think like social media and adapting like social media culture has been now in journalism that newspapers are kind of
Well, it's very important. I don't know if anybody did research on me, but I got sued by my newspaper when I took my Twitter account with me to the Athletic. It was like a whole thing that was on Deadspin and everything. So my first foray into Deadspin was after I got sued by my newspaper on that. I won, by the way. I still have the Twitter account, so just wanted to say that. But I'll say, like, when I first started covering Auburn, I didn't even know what Twitter was. And this was in like 2008. So it was still like relatively new at that time. And somebody, an editor there, was describing it to me in the interview process. I'm like, that's the stupidest thing I've ever heard of. Like, why would I ever pay attention to that? And now I can't take 5 seconds away from it and I don't feel right if I'm not checking it constantly. So that kind of tells you, how it drives news consumption and how you better be a part of it right now. And there are obviously other ones, Instagram and all sorts of stuff. I don't get as much into that because I'm old at this point and I haven't adapted as well as other people, but I'm more into the written stuff on Twitter. But yeah, I mean, you have to be on it. You have to be on it all the time. And it stinks sometimes because you feel like you're not paying attention to your family sometimes when you're scrolling through, but that's sort of what the business is just keeping abreast of everything that's going on. So it sucks sometimes to have to do that, but I think it's a necessity in the business and certainly something you have to be aware of the whole time.
How you doing? My question is, how do you keep track of all the recruiting that takes place at Virginia Tech? It's kind of tough for journalists who, they're always kind of a step behind because they can't obviously ask the coaches who they're recruiting or how or whatever they're doing. How do you keep track of all that?
I just read all the stuff that Jason writes for Tech Sideline. That way I don't have to do it myself. Admittedly, I don't really like the recruiting stuff. It's just not something I've ever enjoyed. And, all these fans slobbering all over these high school players that, might leave after a year or might not even pan out once they get to a school. I don't necessarily like writing a bunch of features, talking to high school players. Very few of them have anything interesting to say. But it's still part of the job. I mean, you have to kind of keep tabs on it. And I think we have something in place at the Athletic where we address it when a guy commits, or if it's a very interesting recruit, we'll write a feature story on them. But we're more of like trend-based stuff, kind of looking bigger picture, where are they going direction-wise, geographically? Is this NLI or NIL thing going to change the face of recruiting? And I think yes, and that's something that we're on right now. So I think it's a less with us, it's a little bit less of the nuts and bolts of the day-to-day recruiting stuff. I'll leave that to the 247 Sportses and the Rivalses and all those other sites out there. But when a guy commits, that's kind of when we step in and take it from there. So it's at least nice where I work that they don't ask us to just be on top of all the junior days and who's visiting and who's in this guy's top 5. Because frankly, I just do not give a shit about all that stuff. But Jason does an excellent job with it. So.
Thanks. Big questions answered?
Just big picture, what's your favorite thing about covering college sports? What does it produce for you?
You know, I think as time has gone on, I just really enjoy the events. Like there's something real, like I don't cover basketball, but I kind of wish that I did a bit more often just to like go to these events and be part of it. Because, you know, that's the excitement of it. That's the energy that you feel for the programs, the crowd and things like that. And, you know, football is nice in the fall because you always have something to look forward to every weekend. And these, you know, huge events at these stadiums with 70, 80,000 people sometimes. And then you get to the off season. I'm like, man, it's like 9 months of just nothing and talking about getting to those games. And sometimes that can get really long, but I'm always heartened by the fact that, you know, come fall, there's going to be a lot, you know, 12 straight weeks where I'm going to be covering something that's really cool like that. And sometimes you get extremely big games. I mean, I remember covering the Auburn, Alabama game in the Cam Newton year, which is still probably the best game I've ever covered. And one that they're making documentaries of now. And you look back at that, you're like, that's kind of cool to be a part of that and be there for when that happens. So I've always been an event guy and I really like the games. I've always liked going to the games. I really get a rush from being in the stadium with stuff like that. So I'd say that's probably the biggest thing I like about covering college sports.
Where does the 2012 Russell Athletic Bowl rank in that?
It was great because of how bad it was. You were there at that one, right, Stam?
I was there, yeah. That was my first bowl game, I think, on the cover of Virginia Tech.
Let's see. What was the final score of that? 13-10 in overtime. In a pouring rain. I think Virginia Tech ran for 3 yards in that game on like 30 carries. I think they averaged like 3 inches a carry or something like that. And they won. They snapped the ball over the quarterback's head on the first play of the game for a safety, and they won the game in overtime in like a pouring rain. And then afterwards, we were asking Frank Beamer, basically, are you going to fire your entire coaching staff? That was a bowl game too. This is supposed to be between 2 decent teams. So that one stands out.
How many missed kicks were in that game? It was a lot.
It was a couple, I think. It was a terrible game. It was still the worst game I think I've covered. And I covered that 6-3 double overtime game against Wake Forest a couple years ago.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the one with Frank Beamer raising his hands.
Yeah.
I was just about to ask about that. So what was that game like? The 0-0 heading into overtime and Frank Beamer loving every second of it. Do you like enjoy that, or do you wish for something more, or is something historically bad also interesting?
It's also interesting.
Agreed.
I think if you're covering something, you either want your team to be like 12-0 or 0-12. Like in between is very boring sometimes. And when you're at a game, you either want to see this just like incredible game that you're at, or you just want to see the most insane, boring, not like you can't believe your eyes how bad this game was. And as we're watching that, like every time a team got it close to the 50 or across it, we're like, how are they going to screw it up this time? And they always would. And we're like, is this really going to go 0-0 into overtime? And then to top it off, you know, Frank Beamer with his arms in the air after they missed the field goal at the end to go to double overtime. It's a gift that will live on forever. So I think part of it was just like, this is performance art, this double overtime game. Like it feels like they're almost trying to do it at this point. And that was a whole lot more interesting to me than just covering another, 17-13 game or something that would have been normal.
Questions? I guess you answered everything. I think that's what it seems like.
Well, if you got anything more, I can answer more.
All right. Well, can I share your email address, your athletic email address?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. I'm sure we may have some more questions at a later date. So.
Yeah, anytime. Send them on. I'll respond.
Okay. Sounds good.
Andy, thank you, sir. I hope we didn't keep you from too many beats or too many breaking news stories with Tech football in the last 45 minutes.
No, I've been transcribing interviews all day, so this is a welcome break.
All right. Thanks, Andy.
All right. Thanks for having me, guys.